So welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone. We do have a pretty busy agenda, so I think it would be good if we could maybe move or do that first item. So why don't we all take a few minutes to look over the minutes, and then if someone wants to make a motion to approve, we can do that. And we'll do the board member introductions afterwards. Hopefully we'll have more people here.
We may need to wait on actually making that motion until we have a sufficient number of members present on the call. Do you know what that ETA looks like, Ms. Bernardi?
No, apologies. We knew that we had 13 members confirmed, and we knew that at least one of them was going to be late. But I think given some technological difficulties we've been facing, aha, yay!
Can I just say hello? I'm sorry, I had something else that ran up to 10. I had to run now to my office, but I'm good to go. So this is Lily Kajavi, sorry, board member just joining. Great to see you all.
Have quorum.
At the risk of insulting Brendan, we're all very happy to see you.
So Lily, we're all looking at the minutes, and then if someone wants to make a motion to approve them, we can at least move that agenda item forward.
I'd be happy to jump into the fray and move to approve the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Oh, second. Oh, sorry. I was on mute. Sorry.
Okay, so perhaps do we need a roll call, Nancy, or just all? Is anyone against approving the minutes? Okay, so let's let the minutes are approved. Why don't we go back in the agenda, and maybe we can do board member introductions. So I'll hand it to the person in the upper left of my screen, which is Andrea Guerrero.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Andrea Guerrero from Alliance San Diego. Nice to see you all.
And how about Sheriff Ayub?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Ayub, Sheriff of Ventura County, and I represent the California State Sheriff's Association.
Commissioner Ray?
Good morning, everyone. Amanda Ray, Commissioner of the California Highway Patrol.
Melanie Ochoa?
Melanie Ochoa from ACLU of Southern California.
Brendan Woods?
Good morning, Brendan Woods, Public Defender of Alameda County, representing the California Public Defenders Association.
Chief Swing?
Good morning, David Swing, Police Chief for the City of Pleasanton, representing the California Police Chiefs Association.
Lily Kajavi?
Lily Kajavi, a professor at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and an appointee of the Attorney General's office.
Pastor Kennedy?
Recording is on.
All right, Brian Kennedy, I pastor at Mount Zion Church of Ontario, down here in Southern California.
And LaWanda Hawkins?
I'm LaWanda Hawkins, Justice for Murdered Children, LA County.
And I'm trying to see, am I missing some?
I believe that we may have two other board members who are not on camera. Amar Campanajar, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, it's Amar Campanajar here in San Diego. Good to be with you all.
And then is Dr. Armeline on?
Yes, I'm here, and I'll be on camera here in a minute. My name is Will Armeline. I'm the Director of Human Rights Institute at San Jose State, and also representing NAACP, Silicon Valley today.
Great. Hey, and I'm Steve Raphael from UC Berkeley. So I think that's all of us. And so next on our agenda, we have an update. Let me make sure I'm reading it correctly. Hold on, sorry. Next is update from the Department of Justice.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Beninati from the California Attorney General's office. I'm a supervisor in the Civil Rights Enforcement section. It's really nice to have not only the board members here this morning, but so many members for the public joining us today. So we really appreciate you taking the time to help us in our annual report, which is going to comprise the bulk of the discussion today. I first wanted to introduce to you all a new Special Assistant Attorney General to Attorney General Rob Bonta, Damon Brown. Damon comes to us he served as a city attorney for the city of Compton, where he was the elected chief legal officer. He served as a legal advisor to the city council and represented the city in civil litigation and other municipal matters. He also has 17 years of experience in private law firms where he has represented public agencies and private businesses in a range of civil matters, including labor and employment, class action litigation, constitutional, and civil rights matters. He earned his BA in African American Studies and Political Science from UC Berkeley, and he earned his law degree from Vanderbilt University Law School. So we are very pleased to have Damon joining the DOJ team in this capacity as the advisor to Attorney General Bonta. Damon, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words. It's up to you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Certainly excited to join you this morning and looking forward to a fruitful discussion and being apprised of all the activities of this board. So thank you.
Thank you, team. And then I would like to, I think Allison was going to speak next, or was it going to be Erin? I wasn't sure.
I'm happy to speak unless Erin, you would like to give the update. I know Erin sent me the update, so wanted to give a brief update on data, but Erin, please feel free to jump in. We wanted to let you all know that DOJ is in the final stages of helping all the Wave 4 agencies with their readiness to start their data collection on January 1st. So this is the last wave. So that means that it is, after January, we will have over 400 agencies in California collecting their stop data, which is wonderful. So the Client Services Program at DOJ has been working very hard to get them all ready to go and start collecting on January 1st. We've had a few agencies start collecting early, which is great, and all of the agencies that will begin collecting in January are being trained and their systems tested, so they are ready to go. And so that is very exciting news. We also wanted to give you all a brief update on the regulations. So I will turn that over to Tanya Koshi, and then I'll be back to give kind of an overview of where we are with the report and the meeting that we're having today and the upcoming meetings that we'll be having in the next 2 months.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, everyone. So as many of you know, we publicly posted the proposed amendments to the regulations in early July. Following that, we had a roughly two month period of time during which we accepted public comments. and we held 2 public hearings and also a board meeting, which many of you or most of you had attended. After the end of the comment period, we tallied up that we got 28 comments, 6 oral comments during the course of the 2 public hearings, and 22 written comments. Where we are now is we are reviewing all of those comments and revising the proposed amendments, and we're currently seeking internal approval of the revisions. If we do get internal approval of those revisions, what we'll do next is publicly post those revised proposed amendments, and that will trigger a 15-day comment period during which the public can provide additional comments on the proposed regs. We are still on track to post the final proposed regulations or submit the proposed final regulations to OAL, the Office of Administrative Law, in early January 2022 or February 2022, with the goal of getting approval by the Office of Administrative Law in early spring 2022. As I had mentioned at the prior board meeting, our goal is to have the effective date as January 1st, 2023, which should give our office and law enforcement agencies several months to update their stop data collection systems to reflect any modifications as a result of these revised regulations. Thanks.
Before I move on to the update about the report, does anyone have any questions about any of that? Okay, great. Thanks, Tanya. So I just wanted to give you all an overview of where we are with the report. The draft report was sent to all of you and posted on the website. And so that is the work of all of the subcommittees that has taken place so far this year. So many of the sections are, close to being done. There are some others that are just waiting for the data to be added. So we will have 2 additional subcommittee meetings. This year's a little bit of an unusual posture. So normally at this point, we've had the meetings both earlier and later. We're having this meeting a little bit earlier, and then in November, we are going to have 2 more subcommittee meetings for stop data and for the policies and accountability subcommittees to review the final data analyses that are being conducted right now. And then the next full board meeting, so today we'll have a full discussion of the report in front of you. There are a few things that the subcommittees want to bring to the full board. And then at the December 1st meeting, which is the final full board meeting of the year, that's when you all will, have in the past and will in this December will approve of the report in its entirety or make recommendations that we wordsmith aspects of the report in with the co-chairs before the end of the year. And just as a reminder, the report gets published on January 1st, 2022. But the report needs to be finalized several weeks ahead of time so we can make it accessible and post it online, work on translating the executive summary and the fact sheet. So right now you have a draft of the report. What will be coming before the next board meeting is an executive summary that will help pull out some of the recommendations that you all are making in the report. And then we also plan on doing a similar fact sheet to what we have done in the past to highlight some of the major data that you all wish to highlight and that's being highlighted in the report. So those will be condensed, a few pages each, since the report is quite lengthy. But that's what we're looking forward to, all of your discussion today about the contents and the substance of the report, since by the time we get to the December meeting, that's really the time for more of the final approval and wordsmithing. So if you do have questions, comments, things you'd like to see, please bring them up today during the board discussion and during the discussion of the subcommittee reports. So we're going to proceed with the report outs from the subcommittee, and then we will, have a full discussion about the report. And DOJ is happy to come on during any of those to answer any questions you might all have. Anyone have any questions? No.
A question. Is there, I guess, I just want to know on the agenda, like, what is the best space to just raise like a general question or suggestions for the report that maybe don't fall into specific categories of what's already in there?
So I think later in the agenda, after the public comment, which comes after the subcommittee report outs, then there will be a general discussion about the report. Then there's public comment again before, if the board needs to take any votes, that will happen during the action items and discussion of next steps agenda item at the end of towards the end of the meeting. So it allows for board discussion and public comment before any votes. But there will be time. There's a little less than an hour, and it can be more depending on how quickly the report outs go for discussion of any of the contents in the report.
Okay, are there any other questions before we proceed to the report outs? No? Okay. Well, I guess I can start with the report out for the Stop Data Subcommittee. So our report is going to be very brief, since the contents of our last meeting is going to be the contents of what we're about to talk about. But we met on July 30th, and we discussed the analysis of the stop data for this year, which pretty much strongly parallels what it's been in the last few years in terms of looking at stops relative to population benchmarks, looking at hit rates, and then looking at the veil of darkness test. A few issues that came up was, what an unusual year 2020 has been, and how there's obviously going to be fewer stops given the kind of halting or the impact on human activity of the pandemic. And then also there were some concerns and issues of clarification regarding the benchmarks that are being used and how CHP's stops are being averaged in with everybody else, that I believe the staff have addressed in the current report, but we can get into that later as we go. But that's pretty much all I have to report from that meeting, and we'll have lots of time to talk about the results of the report in a few minutes. Do we want to go on to post? I'm not sure who's doing the report out for post.
I think we're going to tag team it today. Melanie and I will be doing it. Melanie takes the lead, though, completely. I just follow in her footsteps.
You're so kind. And also a little bit of a liar. So I'll start with the AB 846 comment letter. As we've discussed in previous meetings, DOJ presented on, I believe, and as you saw in the report, AB 846 is a bill that passed that revised the minimum standards for California peace officers' employment by amending the government code to require that officers are free from bias against race or ethnicity, gender, nationality, religion, disability, or sexual orientation that might adversely affect the exercise of powers of a peace officer. And it adds an existing requirement to evaluate an officer's emotional and mental condition that includes evaluation of officers' bias. And it specifically requires post to update material to identify explicit and implicit bias. And so the post issued proposed regulations to basically achieve that goal that was directed by the legislature. And we have, in the post subcommittee, we looked at that, heard input from post, and came up with a recommendation letter that would be essentially public comments from the board if the board agrees. I want to focus on, basically there are 3 recommendations in the letter, but it was also circulated to you and with your meeting materials, so you should have a copy of that. As an FYI, all public comments are due to post by October 25th. So if you have any changes to the proposed recommendations and don't just want to approve what we worked with DOJ to create, we should try to work that through today in today's meeting so that there's enough time to finalize and approve and get to post. So the letter, like I said, makes 3 recommendations. The first is that investigators and evaluators be required to assess social media accounts for explicit bias. In the framework that was created by POST, they did include social media as one of the things that could be looked at, but it wasn't required that it be looked at. We think that social media, as discussed in the report, has been demonstrated repeatedly to be a place where bias viewpoints have been expressed by peace officers. It was also some of those incidents were also explicitly identified in the legislative material for AB 846. So it seems like the legislature did intend for that to be something that was investigated to look for instances of bias. So we're just making that mandatory. We're suggesting that POST make that mandatory rather than discretionary to look at that. And the other 2 kind of related recommendations is while the proposed regulations already state that the report has to include findings of biased behaviors, attitudes, and or bias relevant traits or attributes called the bias assessment framework, it doesn't require that the investigator clearly state forth kind of what they looked at or what their determinations were. So now we're suggesting that they require the investigator to make specific findings that they have on record for whatever their determinations are. So basically to not just make a finding, but explain their finding in a place that can be like referred to and looked at and understood better. And so similarly, for the evaluator, it also is asking that they make specifically detail what they looked at and kind of what their conclusions were based on what they looked at, rather than just a kind of bottom line conclusion. I think that will help also in the process of potentially adjusting this and understanding the success of this process and how they might deviate from person to person and make sure that it's being uniformly kind of applied across folks and across situations. So I think this is going to be helpful in developing the body of research for evaluators and investigators in the future. So again, those 2 things are not really changing what they're doing, it's just making them write down so that it can be understood. Again, the letter is attached in the meeting material if you want to take a moment to look at it. Otherwise, we can maybe vote on the comment letter after Brendan finishes his presentation. Or I guess later, I don't know, I guess actually I should defer to DOJ if this is something that we're voting on now, if we're waiting for voting on that later, but Brendan can still do his.
I think in terms of voting, if you all want to discuss the letter now, I think now would be appropriate to do that either before or after Brendan gives his update. But I think we want to hold the vote to approve the letter to move it forward until after you've all taken public comment.
I guess I defer to the chairs, Chief Swigger, Dr. Raphael. Should we discuss the letter now, or I think you're muted, Doctor. Steve, you're muted. Steve, you're on a roll, but we can't hear you.
I didn't know if Dr. Raphael was going to chime in. I think that we should definitely have an opportunity for public comment on it. So maybe it's something that we discuss after that point in time. We're going to take action on it. That's under the action items and next steps.
Okay, so then I will go then. Another area that we discussed in our subcommittee was LD3 or Learning Domain 3, and made several recommendations, areas in which we recognize that there needs improvement. I think first off, we start out by POST, which I think was kind of shocking to me, does not provide a facilitated guide to the instructors, meaning there's no guideline that ensures any sort of consistency across the academy courses. I'm sorry there. Can you guys hear the sirens? I apologize. Give me. Okay, we're good. Second, the workbook does not provide a very good historical context of policing, particularly as it impacts communities of color, nor is there any real in-depth discussion of contemporary events, including the killing of BIPOC people today. In one section, it noted there was not much content or context of historical events. Didn't mention Jim Crow or redlining or segregation. And this is concerning because I said earlier, the way this is discussed is really based on the instructor's own knowledge, and there is no guide providing the instructors the level of knowledge that they have on these topics or to teach these subjects. Also, there is no ownership within the course about the role of law enforcement and how it is played, contributing to the community's mistrust, both historically and currently. Community perspectives aren't really meaningfully dived into or incorporated into the course. So, for example, all community members do not feel safer when they see the police. I can say that from my own experience as a really well-educated and successful Black male. I don't feel that way, and unfortunately, my kids don't feel that way either. What else? I think the principle of policing section is not particularly well developed, and it's not a primary focus of the course. And I think we discussed in a similar vein the implicit bias in historical and current event sections do not include much depth. I think I said that already. What else? The workbook references outdated and widely criticized practices like broken window policing. I think we felt strongly that the court should remove that outdated concept. It actually contributes and encourages officers to treat certain communities a certain way, producing fairly disparate and racist outcomes. And it also alienates communities and contributes to real mistrust within communities. What else did I have here? I think finally, it needs to include alternatives to police interventions, particularly when mental health crises are present. That should be really woven in throughout the course. Police officers should be taught to really connect to appropriate social services interventions or mental health concerns, and they need to have more of an open-mindedness with regards to how to solve community issues. So I think those were all of our recommendations that we discussed, and they are included in the report for the most part. I think I covered everything, Melanie? She's my boss. I do whatever she says, you know.
Excellent. Much better than I could have done.
Not true. And then we also talked about the composition of the post commission. Do you want to go? I go. Both go together.
You're doing so well. Why stop?
And I think the recommendation with regards to have it be a larger body and have more reflection of community members. The post commission itself right now consists of 18 members. By law, 10 of those must be from law enforcement. I think we really felt strongly, we've discussed, that it should be expanded more to reflect the same composition of other communities, other commissions, where there are more civilian input and community members that are on the committee. The commission, sorry. And I think that wraps up our report for the most part.
Do we have any comments from board members about the post-committee report? Hearing none, shall we move on to calls for service? Thank you, Melanie and Brendan.
Well, very good. I'm happy to report out on the calls for service subcommittee. And for the record, Bill Ayub, Ventura County Sheriff. Bias by proxy, this year subcommittee members attended the Post-Dispatch Advisory Council meeting and reviewed the trainings and policies surrounding dispatch. Presently, there are no uniform policies and procedures to create standards for these dispatch centers, and here's a couple examples. Some dispatchers have the ability to override priority of a call based on information solicited from the caller, while others exclusively rely on a computer program to prioritize calls. And some agencies have policies that they cannot refuse any call for service and will always send an officer to the scene, while other agencies afford the dispatcher more discretion regarding when or how to dispatch a public safety professional to a call. The POST and the Dispatcher Advisory Council are responsible for establishing the minimum guidelines and training for public safety dispatcher programs. POST does not mandate bias training for dispatchers, and it is not part of the academy course. Any anti-bias training is presently done at the agency level. The subcommittee recommended to POST that they add a required course on bias to the basic training for dispatchers. Such a mandatory course would ensure that all dispatchers receive training on bias that is relevant to their position and would eliminate disparities in the foundational training dispatchers receive from their own agencies. Subcommittee also looked at community-based bias responses to bias-based calls for service, including a New York model to help communities who may be affected by the bias-based calls and mitigate that damage. Another area the subcommittee explored as an important step in diverting calls for service is establishing protocols for circumstances when officers are not immediately necessary. Both the Tucson Police Department and the Camden Police Department could serve as models. And for example, Tucson Police Department expanded alternatives to police response, including eliminating police responses to certain calls for service and transferring them to a more appropriate agency, including issues like barking dogs, stalled cars, lost electronic devices, and status offenses such as a runaway child or underage drinking. Mental health crisis response. Another area the subcommittee reviewed this year is ways to improve mental health crisis response and ways to shift these types of calls for service away from the police and into the hands of healthcare providers. The subcommittee also developed a list of guiding principles related to mental health crisis response, such as a care first response, anti-bias training, trauma-informed care, peer intervention, harm reduction, etc. The full list can be found on pages 150 through 153 of the draft report. The subcommittee also reviewed emerging crisis response models, including the San Francisco Street Crisis Response, Denver's STAR response, Sacramento and Oakland's Mental Health First, and the Los Angeles CAT 911 program. By diverting nonviolent calls for service involving a wide range of social issues from mental health care to being unhoused, officers can focus their efforts on the most serious crimes. Community-based response programs have already been successful at diverting nearly 20% of all police calls for service, giving officers more time to investigate the more serious crimes. And that concludes my report out from the subcommittee.
Thank you, Chief Ayub. Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, well, let's move on to civilian complaints.
Good morning, everyone. This is Board Member LaWanda, and Pastor Kennedy and I were responsible for the Civilian Complaint Subcommittee. We met on August the 30th, and we reviewed the complaint forms for law enforcement agencies in Wave 3 and 4. And we were concerned with the civilian complaint process and procedures, as well as we wanted to know how can we improve the law to ensure standardization, access, and accountability statewide, because certain areas throughout the state, as most of you all are aware, one law enforcement agency may be doing one thing right in the same county and another one could be doing something else. So we need it to be standardized, that everyone is following the same thing, and we need some clarification. We are making a recommendation to the California legislation because we need clarification. We need for someone to define civilian complaint. That needs to be defined. And we need to improve access and accountability in the civilian complaint process and procedure. And we need to prohibit deterrent language, because there are some things that some law enforcement agencies put in their complaint forms that can deter other people, that can deter people to file a complaint. And some of them don't put it on their forms. And we don't know if it should even be included on the form. So we need some clarification on that. And we recommended that there be a definition regarding the word, regarding the term civilian complaint and complaint. We recommended that complaint means either of the following, and we had two different things we recommended. A, any issue brought to a department or agency where the complaint perceives that an officer engaged in a criminal conduct, abusive or discriminatory behavior, inappropriate or discourteous conduct, or violation of any law or rules and regulations of the department or agency, or B, disagreement solely with the policies, procedures, or services of the department or agency and not with the performance of any personnel. If during the course of investigating this type of complaint, an officer discovers conduct by another officer that could be the bias of a complaint under subdivision, the officer shall report this conduct to a supervisor, which should be logged, tracked, and investigated separately from the original complaint. With respect to improving access and accountability, we reviewed several best practices, recommendations that the board has identified over the past 4 years that we believe that legislators should add to the state law. And here's a couple of them. Assign a tracking number to each complaint when it's provided to the compliant, because sometimes you file a complaint, you don't know what's happening. So we're asking for a tracking number. Everyone be given one when they file a complaint. This way you can know what's going on and you can track it yourself. Provide a timeline, because we don't know how long does it take for these investigations to go on. Everyone has different rules, and where is it posted? We don't know. Prohibit a law enforcement agency from terminating an investigation into a complaint solely because of a compliant withdrawal of the complaint. It still needs to be investigated. Finally, when it comes to deterrent language, and this is a thing we really got to look at, we focused our discussion on Civil Code 47.5 and our review of Wave 3 and early adoption of Wave 4 agencies. Civilian complaints, we came across an increased use of civil advisory warning. Officers, this was being put on some of the complaints, telling people that if you file this complaint, that the officer may file a civil lawsuit against them for defaming them if they file a false complaint. But sometimes you may file a complaint and it may not be false, you're just not able to prove it. And that wording alone can scare some people. So but on some of the complaints, this was actually on the complaint. And we think that this needs to be reviewed. Also, removal of Penal Code 148.6, requirement that the advisory be on the form and that a complaint form must sign this form. These are things we are asking. Now, we are simply recommending here that agencies do not include this on the forms itself, and that legislators change the law to prohibit these things from being on the form. And then let me explain what 148.6 is again. We think this itself can serve as a deterrent. The advisory code 146 is remindable. I need 146, Penal Code 148.6 is similar to Penal Code, Civil Code 47.5. And it's talking about if you say something on here and they found out that it defames law enforcement, you can be sued. And by having that on the form, we're concerned that it may not, may turn people off for filing a complaint. Not saying that, they should not be aware, but where should it be? Should it be on the form? Should it be on their website? It's questionable. And that's all for me.
Thank you, Board Member Hawkins. Pastor Kennedy.
Wanda represented both of us in her comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Regarding Luanda's comments, I had a question for our DOJ partners. I remember a few years ago, the issue of the deterring language on the forms had come up, and I thought we were seeking guidance from DOJ regarding whether it was consistent with a California Supreme Court precedent, I believe. Maybe I just remember the pre-pandemic discussion, which feels like 100 years ago. But is there an update? Would anybody have an update on that by any chance?
I don't know. Someone needs to pull it up, the penal code 148.6. So
There is a conflict in the law between federal and state law on that, and as to whether including the admonition on complaint forms is constitutional. But the board did at the end of 2019 write a letter to the legislature recommending that the legislature remove the requirement to include that in complaint forms. And there are law enforcement agencies that have done that already. So the board has already recommended to the legislature that they remove that, but no action has been taken by the legislature at this point on that.
So do we write another letter, or these three the subcommittee voted to incorporate these three topics into the recommendation to the legislator. So we need to find out if, should we write another letter?
Well, if this is an action item, should we have a conversation about this now, and then after public comment, we can vote on this matter about whether we want to communicate to the legislature again about this.
Okie dokie.
I don't know. Does anyone have comments about this topic?
I feel bad because I just earlier in the conversation for Member Ochoa and Woods deferred that conversation to later regarding 846. So for consistency, if we're going to have a conversation, which I'm okay with, I just recommend we also go back and show deference and respect to Member Ochoa and Woods and have that conversation regarding 846 as well.
And I think just to clarify, we can have, you all have, we have until 11:45 for these report outs. So you can all feel free to have both of those discussions now if you'd like. We would just ask that the votes, if you are going to vote on any action items, that happens, Chief Swing, as you said, at the end with the action items so that you can hear public comment first.
And sorry, but you can always have an additional public comment if you wanted to vote and have public comment just on these two issues before you vote as well.
Okay, well, perhaps we should take them in order. Should we talk about the language on complaint forms first, if anyone has comments regarding that topic?
I'd love to chime in here. So this is a topic that we have talked about before, and I think there are a couple of things that we could do. One is to underscore this in the report, the January 1 report that we're preparing now, of a review of prior recommendations that we've made and a status on them. I think that would be a really good way to highlight this for the legislature so that they see it January 1 as they go into their legislative work for the year. I think that would actually be the best way. I'm not sure that another letter would be helpful at this point, but I would support one if people thought that was an important thing to do to underscore our interest in that activity.
Question, this is Melanie Ochoa. And then a potential proposal. When we say a letter to the legislature, what does that actually mean? Like, who is it direct? How is it received? How are they made aware of it? Is it literally like a letter to each office, or is it some more formal thing? And then related to that, I was wondering if there are other things that come through in the report that may be things that the legislature could take action on, if it would make sense to send a letter of maybe all of those items together that we think, that we, once we have the report agreed to, so that we can send like a package of things that we think they need to be taking action on.
In fact, maybe a transmittal letter, so a letter that would accompany the report for January 1 that expresses our specific recommendations in the report that are both outstanding and new, I think would be helpful.
Are there any further comments on this particular topic? We can maybe have the discussion about the advisory letter pertaining to officer screening. If anyone has comment about that, why don't we have that conversation now?
Well, I think anything that relates to officer screening that we can do to ensure that we're hiring the best and brightest, and potentially identifying those that have displayed bias in their social media accounts is a benefit to our profession. That our profession, of course, all of our residents and communities benefit from that level of screening.
I just add so that if it's quiet, it's not interpreted. I want to convey that I'm being quiet, but I'm really strongly in support of the arguments that have been made for these recommendations, and both in the materials that we received before the meeting and in the subcommittee report outs. So just wanted to. So I favor this variety of actions we proposed, including direct communication with the legislator letters, but also that the report really convey these as well. And in particular, just swinging back to Board Member Guerrero's suggestion that the report indicates sort of the status of recommendations as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, hearing no further comment, perhaps we shall move on to the next agenda item. So let's see. Well, we're scheduled for a break, but we're a little early. Shall we move on to public? Unless there's, maybe we'll take one more call for public comments on these two topics.
Sorry, Steve, there's also the policies report out. We have not done that one yet.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. All right, so let's go to the policies subcommittee.
Great. So I am the chair of the policy committee, and hopefully at the next meeting we'll have a co-chair. So we last met on August 19th, and we focused our conversation on a few things. We will be having a follow-up meeting probably the second week of November, because we weren't able to get to everything that we wanted to talk about. But we specifically focused our conversation on consent searches, and we reviewed the disparities, the search disparities based on initial data, and discussed some of the concerns around consent searches not being statistically successful in locating contraband, and the harm that they could cause, and the harm generally that they could cause in developing relationships with law enforcement and in trust of law enforcement. And so we talked about voluntary consent searches in particular, and raised questions about the voluntariness of consent searches when there's a power relationship, and when there's no affirmative responsibility of officers to inform people of the right to refuse the consent search. And so following that conversation and a review of what other agencies have done, specifically CHP issued a moratorium on consent searches for a number of years because of some of these concerns that we discussed. We recommended that law enforcement agencies and municipalities adopt policies and laws that prohibit consent searches, so that the only consent searches, so that the only searches that would be appropriate would be those based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause. We also talked about supervision-based stops and searches, and these are stops and searches that involve inquiring whether somebody is on probation or parole, which has a disparate impact on vulnerable communities, including communities of color and other communities. And so, again, after a healthy discussion, we recommended that law enforcement agencies limit their inquiries on supervision status unless it's relevant to specific law enforcement objectives. And there are agencies that have done this, like Los Angeles, Humboldt, and Sacramento. And so we point to those in the report of agencies as examples who have already done this. We also talked about pretext stops and shared concerns about pretext stops. These are stops for minor infractions, usually traffic, and there is a disparate impact on how those result in additional outcomes and activities of law enforcement encounters. We did not land on any recommendations, and so you'll see in the report that it's just a discussion of the concerns. In addition, we didn't get to, but we will be getting to, a conversation about policies relating to transgender Californians and also Californians with disabilities. And the report that DOJ has prepared as a draft does an excellent job of outlining the concerns, reviewing the findings of non-RIPA research, analyzing the RIPA data, and reviewing examples of policies and best practices, and makes recommendations based on those. And so, I encourage everyone to take a look at those. The policy discussion on transgender profiling starts at page 46 and offers 12 recommendations, which are drawn from best practices, namely the National Center for Transgender Equality. So I commend to you a review of those things. I'm happy to go over them, but the committee has not delved into them quite yet. And on disability issues, that's the discussion that follows the transgender policy issues. Again, a recommendation of best practices that are drawn from the American with Disabilities Act and best practices that relate to ADA and police interactions. And so I commend to you those recommendations, which are on page 78, drawn from the ADA and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And then finally, or not finally, but that we are also charged with reviewing issues around accountability affirmative policies that get at bias-free policing. We did not have a lot of time to discuss that. We'll be discussing that when we meet again soon. And that conversation is in the report right now. There is some draft language around it, and that's really based on a review that DOJ did of Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies based on, so they reviewed these agencies based on the best practices that we had outlined in our 2019 report. And, we measured agencies against standalone bias-free policing, clearly written policies, easily accessible policies with concrete definitions, clarifications on the limitations and the limited use of characteristics of individuals in establishing reasonable suspicion and probable cause, standard of conduct in encounters with the community, training, data analysis, accountability policies that include disciplinary policies, affirmative obligations to report bias, and prohibitions on retaliation, and supervisorial review to ensure that the tenets of bias-free policing are integrated fully into the agency. So these are the metrics that we measured the Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies on. There's a narrative description of how they measured up. And then there is a review, a summary review of Wave 3 and Wave 4 agencies. That is in a chart. I believe that's on page 116. And so those are worth looking at. And then we also looked at auditing practices based on the conversation that the full board had recently in our last meeting. And, that goes to enhancing the integrity of the data. And so there are recommendations in the report starting at page 125 that include recommending policies that to audit records and to do a cross review of other records that may be available, like OIG reports, to assess outlier patterns, to incorporate video analysis, share data findings with the public, and also this is really our future work is to inquire about body-worn camera policies and practices as that video footage becomes more important and more available. And then I guess lastly, there's a discussion of the use of stop data for policy change and making sure that agencies are in fact reviewing the data out of this effort and incorporating it into their development of policy at the agencies. That was a lot. There's a lot to consider in the report, but that's an overview of what our committee is up to.
Hey, thank you, Andrea. Are there any comments on the report from the Policies Committee? All right. So Allison and Nancy are, I think that's all the committees, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think next on our, what is next on our agenda? Is it, we have a break schedule. Do we want to just keep going? Because I think we're a little early. Maybe should we go to public comment?
That sounds great.
Okay. So let's open up the floor, and we'll do. We ask the public. We welcome your feedback. We may not. No one probably will respond in real time, but we value your feedback on the report in our meetings. we'll go region by region. So let's start in Southern California. And I see Mr. Hilton. Would you like to go first?
Yes, I'm Richard Hilton, and I've been busy writing in the chat. I'm going to repeat myself. I would like Commissioner Ray, Chief Swing, and Sheriff Ayub to consider resigning from the board. A public body, a policing body, must have a high reputation. The three people I've named have elected to ignore laws that apply to them, and that puts this body into disrepute. The California Highway Patrol has been ordered to remove its practice or to cease its practice of 30-day impounds, and it has refused to follow the rulings from a federal court. Chief Swing has refused to follow the Ninth Circuit's decision on 148.6, and Sheriff Ayub has refused to follow the Supreme Court's decision on his department's duty to release by anonymizing data that contains OII and PII to people in the public who request it. Neither person can remain in good standing because neither person obeys the law. So I'd like them to consider leaving. With respect to the business of audits, audits are important if our audits are acted upon. The San Diego Police Department has excellent audits, or they seem excellent to me looking at them from here, because they disclose things that I find myself. The problem with them is that they're not acted upon, they're not corrected. The result, and you've heard me talk about this more times than you care to like, is that 40% of the uses of force are not reported to you. You don't know about them. Well, maybe you do. But let us say that they're not in the REPA data. Now, they have not looked at use of force. Well, not until last week. They formed a department last week, Wednesday, which somehow coincidentally followed a letter that I wrote to them using your report, meaning the REPA report for 2021 that showed that San Diego does not examine use of force. It all ties together. And it all comes out from the fact that data integrity is not verified. And so the board's representation, the CJIS representation that the integrity of data is verified is false. And I'd like you to do away with that representation. Say something else. I can't think of anything else to say. But when I'm done, I will. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Hilton. Next in line, Karen Glover in Southern California. Ms. Glover, are you still there? Okay.
The line is open. Please unmute your microphone, Karen Glover.
Well, I think we're having some technical problems with her line, but Ms. Glover, we'll go on to Central California. We'll come back. We'll come back to you in a moment if we can work that out. So, are there any comments from Central California? Any comments from Northern California? Okay, I see none. Let's try Ms. Glover one more time. Oh, I believe I saw someone raise their hand. Julia, I'm sorry, it came and went. So, but please feel free to speak. Oh, Julia Tron.
I don't know if you can hear me. I can't seem to unmute my video. I put a couple of comments in. I am with the Bar Association of San Francisco. We have a criminal justice task force. I know some of you pretty well, especially those from the Department of Justice. We've been working on reform with the San Francisco Police Department for some time. I put a couple of comments in the chat. I'm interested in learning how we can respond to revisions once those go in. I don't know how we get notice of that. And then also with respect to bias by proxy, we've done a lot of work here in San Francisco. We actually met with our emergency call center with the staffing there. They were very interested in two things. One, they would like to see training for emergency call centers on how to recognize bias by proxy. And then two, they're very much interested in having a feedback loop. So and they gave us examples of where they had sent the police out to what they thought might be a bias by proxy call, and they really would have appreciated a feedback loop. What happened? Was it? How'd you handle it? How can we do it better next time? So creating some sort of a feedback loop among these agencies, I just wanted to raise it because we're sort of boots on the ground doing this work. And we're doing it in a thoughtful way, I think, in San Francisco with our police department as well as, public defender and a whole bunch of other groups that are involved. The third thing I will say, and I don't know who to raise this with, but we discovered as we were revising one of our general orders that our department, which was following Post, was using the incorrect legal standard on Terry v. Ohio. They were using disjunctive language that a pat search can be conducted when an individual is suspected to be armed or dangerous. We have changed that language in our general orders here, and we recommend that Post look into this, and I'm happy to supply our research to anybody who's interested. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Karen Glover.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think I might open a little can of worms. I don't mean to, but you may already have some insights with this. And I've written it down, so please pardon me. It applies to both the Post Subcommittee and the Accountability and Policy Subcommittee. And specifically, the Post Subcommittee brings up concerns about the social media posts in personnel review. And this concern is really about both explicit and implicit discourse that are unjust discourses, example, like a racist discourse or violent discourse, those types of things. A social media site, policeone.com, which has been around for a long time, has also been found to be a ground for these types of unjust discourses. The Post Subcommittee letter about AB 846, focuses on Facebook's posts about implicit and explicit bias, and similar issues are found on Police One. So in 2019, Police One was purchased by Lexipol. I brought this up I brought up my concerns about Lexipol, I think in 2018 at a live RIPA meeting back way then. And I've brought it up a few times with y'all, and I recently reached out to the AG and just reminded folks of this concern that I don't really think has been addressed that well by RIPA, knowing that it's kind of a can of worms. So for those of you not so familiar, Lexipol is a private organization that provides basically templates for the majority of law enforcement agencies in the US as policy templates. So all the policies that we're talking about within law enforcement agencies, many of them are based upon these Lexipol processes. Again, Lexipol and Police One are now, they're part of the same organization. Police One has been found to have problematic discourses about the communities of color, working class communities, etc. So while I realize this point has huge implications, it's clearly a contradiction that should not be ignored, especially given your really brilliant letter about AB 846 and the concerns about social media postings. My beta version metric, I think I mentioned it a long time ago at a RIPA meeting, but I have basically a metric I developed about what could be called the social justice health of law enforcement agencies. And one of the markers I use is whether or not agencies have reached out to the community to build their policies. That community input and policies for the community matters. Work on law enforcement agency policy needs to be community driven, which is really the breadth of RIPA, the community on the focus, and not policy made by law enforcement for law enforcement, particularly for in a protective mechanism in the legal realm, which is what Lexipol is all about. And I just wanted to bring that out and also say thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. Are there any other people seeking public comment? Mr. Bell? I think you're muted.
You try toggling the mute and unmute again? I'm not hearing on my end.
Does that work? Did that work? I guess not.
Oh, it did. It did. We can hear you now.
We can hear you now.
Yeah.
I was curious. I heard Ms. Glover talk about Lexipol. We've been using Lexipol for, I think, over almost a decade. And I'm not really sure about what inappropriate context that Ms. Glover is referring to. I know that Lexipol helps agencies quite a bit because of the amount of research that they're able to do. But I think ultimately what the board should understand is that the agencies have to do their own due diligence. We have to review those policies and ascertain whether or not the policies that they're writing or recommending based on either best practices, state law, federal cases, any kind of case law that's come into the current status. Does that impact? How does that impact our agency? How does it really happen in our agency? So, I would say that the Lexipol policies specifically outline what the current state law is, and or federal law if there's applications there as well, obviously. And then we look at those policies and ascertain, hey, does something need to be implemented directly because the law says that? Do we do something different within our agency? I can tell you it saves a boatload of time and effort because we're as a small agency, there's no way that we're able to keep up with all the changes that are happening statewide or nationally with new legislative laws or anything else, let alone how to adequately and professionally be able to write those policies that would make any kind of sense. So what we end up doing is taking their recommended version, and then you basically will look at it. Does it make sense? Is it what we really do? Does it need some kind of personal departmental tweaking? Because that's actually what we do here. So I'm not really sure what the problem is. And kind of what I got, if I may have misunderstood her, but even this idea of, these policies are written by police. I don't actually know that that's correct. I think a lot of them, their units are, or their writing components are attorneys, people who've done research, and certainly I don't know what the problem would be having police write policies because we would understand the dynamics of that. So I think that everybody needs to be able to have some perspective from people who are actually in the field, actually doing the work to recognize, hey, is this workable? Is this going to be a problem? Particularly so for what really is the majority of agencies in California, and that is small, under 50-man agencies in the state. So I just offer that out.
Steve, you're muted.
That was all I had at this point. I don't know if there's any questions or anything.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Yeah.
So I believe we've been through all regions of the state. So shall we move on to the next agenda item? I don't know. Do folks want to, maybe we should keep going, or do we want to take a short break now before we get into the discussion of the report?
Would advocate for a maybe 5 to 10 minute break.
Okay. Well, why don't we say we'll reconvene at 11:35?